Hello, everybody. I'm Ed Parcaut, your host of Helping the Brave. Let's bring in our guest today, John Hillen. John, thanks for coming on the show today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Ed.
You say that now. We'll see how it is in 30 minutes or so. All right. What service are you in and why?
Army. My family is Army back to the Civil War.
Wow.
And my father in particular had a very full career, 20 years, Vietnam veteran, 2 tours in Vietnam, shot very badly on his second tour, infantry officer, Green Beret. And so I went in during the, Reagan buildup. They doubled the size of the armed forces during the Reagan buildup. So
I
I
didn't know
went to
that.
the Army, became a cavalryman, cavalry officer.
Yeah, my son went in and he was airborne and then he was first station was Alaska. And then he was sent, his next duty station was Washington State. This is a long way to get to what you just said. And then he said, I don't want to be airborne anymore. And they put him in the cavalry division. And then guess what they just did? They just closed that up.
Yeah. Yeah, I went the opposite way. I was Cav my first tour, and then I'd been jump qualified, got refreshed, and ended up being in a special operations unit as a civil affairs officer on jump status for the next 7 years. Good fun.
Yeah, he had fun, but till he hit a tree, and then he's like, enough is enough.
Yeah, you don't like trees.
Wind blew in, took them all into the trees. All right, so how your whole family was in? You said the Army. I mean,
Yeah, we go back a couple of generations, so it's just kind of the family business in many ways. And I got my own bit of service. I was quite literally on the Iron Curtain the night the wall came down in 1989. So I was in Germany and patrolling the border between East and West Germany when the wall came down that night.
so were you right there where the wall
I was right there. Yeah, and
That's
I
gonna
wrote
be
a
surreal because most people don't understand that whole thing of how Reagan did what he did to get him to drop that wall. And but you
yeah,
being
it's an extraordinary story. I mean, when he came in and became president, we had multiple generations of presidents, Democrat and Republican, who just said, the Soviet Union is something we got to learn to live with. And Reagan came in and somebody asked him about his strategy because he wanted to put pressure on the Soviet Union. He said, my strategy is simple. We win, they lose. And he just wouldn't accept it as a legitimate political system. So he put a ton of pressure on economic, military, political, human rights, everything. And it led to their eventual collapse. He knew underneath that system it was pretty brittle. And sure enough, I was there when it all came apart, and the happiest people in the world were the East Germans and the Czechs that I saw pouring across the border, and so happy to, that they could, see what freedom looked like that they had been denied for 50 years.
Did you watch the Reagan movie?
I did, yeah. I thought it was pretty good. I mean, it's very
Loose.
adulation, right? It's not very critical, but for me as a Reagan fan, I loved it, and it brought back a lot of memories of just living in that era.
What I watched about it was the fact of how before he was even governor of California, he knew how to get rid of Russia. Right.
Yeah.
He had ideas on how to go after them and do certain things. And and you watch him, it's the story and you're like, wow, this guy. And then he gets in as president and he does exactly what he's been working on. But that's unusual. I don't want to say unusual, but we don't see that same thing in the past. I mean, in the future, I mean, right now, except for, and I don't want to get political, but Trump was knocked out of the White House and then he was so bitter for 4 years and got back in, and he has a plan that it's going forward, almost like Reagan had a plan.
Yeah, Reagan had really well-formed political philosophy. I got a friend who wrote a book called Reagan in His Own Hand that goes back and looks at all his old speeches from the 50s. He was like a television host that gave talks, and he wrote it all out himself. And, he got a reputation from critics as being, just another dumb actor. But he had actually a really well-formed political philosophy. And one of them was just, always be on the side of freedom. And so when he saw the Soviet Union, he saw a complete lack of freedom, and he went after it.
Yeah. I mean, if you watch some of his campaign jokes, I mean, it's just hilarious. He was so funny. I had no, I'm not that younger than you, but I just missed that, by a few years. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a great tour. And then, I was sent down to Desert Storm with a lot of other people from Germany and ended up being in the middle of the biggest, tank battle since World War II. I was 25 yards away from H.R. McMaster, who went on to become Trump's national security advisor and a 3-star general. And we fought the only, real tank to tank battle where the Iraqis fought back in a kind of organized way in the middle of Desert Storm. So packed a lot of action into that first tour.
What was Battle of 73 East?
So the 7-3 Easting is just a line on a map.
Yeah.
And, you're in the middle of the desert's featureless. So what do you name a battle after? So it got named after the line, the longitudinal line on the map where we were, 73 degrees east of the Greenwich Mean Line. And we went into Iraq a day ahead of Desert Storm starting to get a head start on all the other forces to go find the Republican Guard. And we found them. And they were pretty much untouched by the air war. They were dug in and ready to fight, and they fought back. And we ended up sort of blowing through them. We ended up destroying a brigade of the Republican Guard in about 28, 29 minutes. Ended up being a very much studied, small unit engagement, still taught at West Point and other places.
Well, it was just the tank battle you were talking about, or is this something totally different?
Yeah, this is the tank battle. It was all tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles, gun tube to gun tube. There was a kind of dust storm blowing, so there was no aircraft involvement. And there's a bunch of YouTube videos about it, and a lot of other things. Much studied battle, and ended up, I don't know if there will be other ones in the future, but it ended up being really the last great tank battle of the 20th century.
Did you write a book about it all?
A lot of people have written books about it. H.R. McMaster wrote a book about it. This guy named Rick Atkinson, who's got a terrific series out right now on the Revolutionary War, it was embedded with us at the end of the war. He wrote a book about it called Crusade. And then Tom Clancy wrote a book about it too, before he passed on.
Yeah, I have a couple guys that's coming on this show in a couple weeks that are authors, and they've written books and even written some stuff for Clancy. It's weird how everything's becoming connected in this little niche that I'm in.
Yeah.
One other thing, what was the question I was going to ask? You got a bronze? Did you get a Bronze Star from that?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. From that action.
And for people who don't know, what's a Bronze Star?
It's about the fourth highest level of combat decoration for actions in combat. You have it, Medal of Honor, and then the Distinguished Service Cross, and Silver Star, and then Bronze Star.
But some of those you're usually not here, right? I mean, a couple of those stars. I'm just saying you were hurt. You might get a Silver Star or something like that when you might not still be here to get those.
Yeah, very much, very much. In fact, living Medal of Honor winners or recipients, they say, right? You receive the Medal of Honor, you don't win it. That are living are pretty rare because a lot of times the actions are so incredible that people perish in the doing.
Right. What did you? All right. So how old were you at that time?
I was 25-year-old lieutenant in Desert Storm.
So what did you learn from that whole situation there? You had to learn because it's unusual for us to have that type of a situation unless we're back in the 70s or World War II, where you're actually using tanks as much as you were to actually use that. What did you learn from that?
Well, I learned relearned a timeless lesson of military affairs, or human affairs for that matter, which is it's all about the people. People matter, right? And talking with vets from Iraq, Afghanistan, and I've spent time with both in the 2000s in both places when I was a diplomat. They had the same experience, right? So we fought the Iraqis. They had brand new equipment, beautiful new Soviet tanks. They had auto loaders. We had, we were doing manual loading of the guns in our tanks, and we still beat them. We lost one guy killed, a couple of guys wounded, and wiped out a huge unit. And when they did a study on the battle, they determined that we didn't have any technical advantage. The weather conditions and everything kind of tamped down our technical advantage. What made the difference was crew training. And we just trained like dogs. I mean, we were just, we trained and trained and trained. I always tell people the sustainable competitive advantage of the American military is not technology, it's training. We train like nobody else does. And I've trained with dozens of militaries around the world. And so that made a huge difference. The other thing, which, led on to my career as a policymaker and a diplomat, is at the end of the war, we're sitting up in Iraq. It's kind of April 1991. And President Bush, the older Bush, had encouraged the Iraqis to continue to rebel against Saddam. But on the other hand, we concluded a peace treaty that let him keep his helicopters and other things. So he's beaten down the rebellion that we encouraged, and we weren't allowed to do anything to help. And it all seemed very odd to a 25-year-old lieutenant. So I thought to myself, like, whose idea was this? Like, is this the way you end a war? Right? It didn't seem to make much sense to me. So at that point, I said, you know what? When I leave the Army, I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna study this stuff. I'm gonna try to figure out, big picture strategy, policy making, things like that.
Is that what you? So how much longer were you in after that? So I should say, yeah. What year did you get out? I should say.
Yeah, so I got out the next year in '92. That was the end of my active duty commitment. Went into the reserves as special operations officer, but I went back to school. I got a couple of graduate degrees. I wrote books about national security, and and was on TV all the time talking about it. And then I
John,
eventually
before,
became
before you go any further, national security to relate to what? Because we have so many. You could talk about computer. You can. So what
the
was
big picture, the national security of nations, why wars are fought. How do you, I mean, think of all of the stuff we've just gone through with Iran, right? All the different wrinkles of how do you address, U.S. interests in the Middle East, what our role should be or not be, how should we do things? So that big picture of grand strategy, U.S. national security, military affairs. So that's what I studied and wrote about.
Did you study the wars themselves? Like, because I interviewed a guy who he wrote a book about the similarities between Vietnam and Iraq.
Yeah, studied a lot of that. I mean, history is the laboratory for these things. So you got to go back. I've done a ton of work on World War II. I was the military advisor for the Call of Duty video game series set
Oh,
in
really?
World War II. So,
Did you
my
make any
work on
money from
World War.
that?
Well, I took Activision stock,
There
which
you go.
turned out to be a good deal as my consulting fee, and Activision did great. And the Call of Duty World War II games, I stopped doing it when they went to zombies and other things. I had no experience with zombies. But the World War II games, we tried to make as authentic as possible. We recorded all the sounds from original World War II weapons. We made sure the tactics and the uniforms and the scenarios were exactly historically accurate. I think it gives those games a very different feel.
Yeah, actually, that's the one I play because I don't really play many games. But I was playing that at the time. I was like, wow, this is exactly, it was really good. So great job helping them out with that. That's because for me, I watch people. I was in physical therapy, and I watch people with the canids in the wrong hand when they're
Right.
walking with it and certain things. And then you watch military more. So I mean, like that's not how they do that. That's you don't
Right.
do that saluting like certain
Right.
things, right? And it's why don't you get it right, people? Let's do it right, So going back to school and doing all that, how did you go to the for working in the government?
So, I wrote a bunch of things, and I got one of my articles got noticed by the then governor of Texas, running for president in 2000, the Bush, the
Burrow?
younger.
There.
Yep. And George W. Bush. And his team called me up and said, these are ideas that the governor likes about, what we should do at defense and the U.S. role in the world. And so I ended up writing, with others, his one defense speech and his one foreign policy speech in the 2000 campaign. There wasn't much talked about in 2000, right? There were 500 stories on shark attacks in the summer of 2000 and almost none on national security issues. So, people weren't thinking about it. And then, of course, 9/11 happened. And I'd been, in special operations world. I had a counterterrorism specialty. I'd done a frontline television special about the future of war and terrorism and bin Laden. And I talked about all that in 99 and 2000. So at that point, the world changed for everybody, including, your audience. And so I went back into government, but, now I'm too old and fat to get back in uniform and make a contribution. So I went in as a diplomat. I became the Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs, working for Condoleezza Rice when she was the Secretary of State.
Well, you say that. I interviewed a guy who was he joined the service at 57 at a veterinarian, the Army, oldest living person. Do you know who I'm talking about?
We had a real skill, right?
Right,
Veterinarian.
right. Well, that was they needed him because they needed that. And he's like, and when you're not taking care of animals, you do humanitarian work as a veterinarian in the Army. And so it was totally, and he got a waiver, was able for 10 years, and he was in from when he was 57, I think got out at 67. So
Yeah, that was a needed skill. I got a buddy I served with in the Special Operations Branch, Green Beret veterinarian, unusual combination, right? In civilian life, he was a horse doctor in Massachusetts. And they shipped him off to Afghanistan because we were using mules. to get up and down those mountains. And he wrote an article about the lost art of mule packing. And in World War II, we used a lot of mules, especially in Italy, in the mountains of Italy, to take ammunition up during the day, to bring wounded and deceased back at night. But it was a lost art. So yeah, veterinarians turned out to come in really handy in the post 9/11 era.
Yeah, because he took care of the animal, the dogs and all those, the training of dogs, and then he did, I think, 6 tours during this period of time. Yeah, it's like, but he's not frontline, so
right.
Yeah, thank God. But and because when people say, "Well, I'm too old," well, you could be too old, but you also could not be too old, depending on what your skill is and what they need at the time. Yeah,
That's
but
right.
For airborne and infantry, yeah, you're too old.
Yeah,
that's a young guy's world. So, what do you do? So we've got all the way up to 2000s and what you're doing there, and you work for Bush. That was junior, right? Not senior.
That's right. Yeah, Bush 43, as
43.
they used to call him.
And so you were in there, and then what happened? What did you do after that?
Well, I was a political appointee, confirmed by the Senate and all that business. So when an administration ends, you leave.
Right.
And, the Obama administration came in. So then I turned to business. I had, I'm trained as a strategist. I write about strategy. I've got a new book out on business strategy right now. And so I went into business, as a strategy guy, and then eventually rose up to be the CEO of a defense technology company. And so I ran a couple of defense technology companies. I took one public in an IPO in 2009 in the middle of the recession, and just, made my living as a business guy, even though I'd never formally studied. I went back to school and got an MBA because I was worried. I'm like, here I am as a business person. I don't know anything. So I did an MBA program just to get up to speed. But the core skills I learned in the Army were the core skills I always used in business, which were basically, thinking strategically, where's this organization going and how should we get there? And leadership, how do I motivate people to want to work together to accomplish something? So those core Army skills served me all the way up to being a public company CEO in business.
Yeah, I feel that. So about 50% of veterans are business owners, and I think, and it has to do with what we learned in the military. And people,
Totally.
we know how to do SOPs and certain, attention to detail on certain things, and people unless you go in the military, you don't have it. And it was funny. I was at the gym this morning lifting, and I needed the Smith machine, and this one young guy was on it. He wasn't using that, but he was doing all this work around him. I asked him, "Hey, this is my last thing. I need to get this in." And he goes, "Oh yeah, go ahead." And then he was like, "Were you military or something? Because you walk like, and it's like, because I'm focused when I do things a certain way, whatever it is, I do it that way. I keep track of everything on my little phone on notes, exactly how much I lifted today and what I'm going to do next. I have it done. It's the same thing we do in business and everything else. Once we learn that, that's why I think military is so important for people. It just gets you so much further ahead if you lean into it.
Right. Yeah. It teaches you, Aristotle said excellence is not a virtue, it's a habit. I think the military teaches you the habits of excellence, and you carry that with you in whatever else you do.
Yeah. I mean, that's the one thing we lose when we get out is our purpose and a lot of other stuff. And I talk to so many people who don't retire in it, and who are, NCO that don't retire in it. But after about 6 to 8 years, you run into things a little bit different as an enlisted. And one of the guys was talking about we need to boot camp out. And after my last fire walk we did for veterans, I sat down, I put it all together and threw it to my people to create it. And we've actually created a boot camp out program. It's not fully going yet, but it's there. So when I can work on it, it's right there ready to go. Cause I was like, it's in my head. I got to get it out. I got to get it on, on a website, get it ready to go. But that's what I think a lot of us need is just once we get out, how do I get connected with everybody again? How do I get all the stuff we lose? We need to be able to get connected again. So.
Yeah. And, the vets I talk with and work with, I always tell them, like, just have confidence in yourself, right? You have had a set of experiences, no matter what they were. You've had a set of experiences that are envied by the rest of America. And you can do anything. So don't be, intimidated by balance sheets or supply chain knowledge or any of that business, right? Just go in there and say, I know how to get stuff done. I know how to lead people. I know how to move to an objective and do it in the right way. And I can do it. Just, the X's and O's you learn. But the core skills of work ethic and being organized and working to a high standard, you've already got those.
So you wrote a book. Is that the Strategy Dialogues, or is that something?
Yeah. That's my newest book. I've been writing a couple of books, capturing lessons learned, and I teach now. So one of the things, I was mystified by is, I've been trained in strategy. I teach strategy, but it was hard for a lot of people to grasp because, it's like big picture. It's about the future. How do I even start thinking about it? Wrap my head around this. So I wrote a very simple book, just saying, this is all the basics that you need, and here's an easy way to learn them all. And so bring it out of the clouds and down into your hands so you can work with it.
And so you said, how many books have you written?
Five different books. Yeah, 2 business books, and then 3 kind of national security policy books.
Just question: when did you start writing your first book?
Oh gosh, well, I did a PhD, after I got out of the Army the first time, and so that essentially you're writing a book,
Right.
PhD.
Well, I'm talking about when you got published. Is one.
1997 was my first book.
And your last book is just recently?
Yeah, it just came out in January. It was the #1 book and for business consulting for a couple of months on Amazon. Still doing well, and it's out there right now.
What I was trying to get at is the difference between 97 versus today. Totally different in writing a book.
Yeah, completely.
Easier or some way harder?
Well, I mean, I write them the old school way. My first book I wrote without the benefit of the internet. I was sitting in archives and the basement of the UN and other places, sifting through papers. Right, the internet wasn't really up and rolling when I was writing it in the mid '90s, and there's no AI to sort through data.
Al Gore didn't read it yet.
I'm sorry.
Al Gore didn't.
No,
internet.
Al Gore was still, coming up with the whole plan, but now it's different. I mean, I don't use AI. We don't ask our students to use it. I don't use it, but now you got all this information at your fingertips.
Publishing and getting it published, that kind of thing is totally different than it was back then. I'm not talking about using AI to write your book, because a lot of people feel, that it should be your words, not somebody else's words.
Yeah.
Now, I have no problem using ghostwriter because there's 2 types of people. Some people can talk real well, and some people can write real well. I, as you can tell, talk real well. Writing is not that. So I used a ghostwriter. I told them everything, and it was my words. It just was, they cleaned it up so people would actually read it. Where a lot of people think a ghostwriter is somebody who writes the book for you and you slap your name on it. No, that's not how that works. That's not how it's supposed to work. Yeah. There might have been some people like that, but that's not what true ghostwriting is. And like you're talking about AI, there's a lot of people who use AI to write a book, slap it out there and get it done, but you really should write the book yourself.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, this book, people said, how long did it take to write your book? Well, when I sat down to write it, and it's like, 200 pages long, I wrote it in 2.5 months, but it was 5 years in the making, because I was teaching a course in and around it for 5 years and bouncing off ideas and playing with ideas and seeing what worked with people and what didn't. So, it's a long time in the making. So, it happens slowly, then quickly.
So where do you teach at?
So I teach at Duke University, and teach a variety of different things in there, but mostly in and around strategy and leadership.
And how did you get that position?
It was my 3rd teaching position. I was teaching at a big state university in Virginia called George Mason, and they wanted a so-called executive in residence, someone who'd been out there running businesses and doing real things. And I went on the staff as not a career academic, but a guy who had lived the life. And so, I could bring a different perspective to the students, and that kind of got me into teaching.
Yeah, you didn't want to be Rodney Dangerfield in the audience yelling at the instructor who had no idea.
I've had my Rodney Dangerfield moments in the classroom, that's not how it really works. Here's the way it really works.
Tells you I watch a lot of movies. But that's what you run into as a business owner, and people are teaching you stuff. Even when you get your MBA, quadratic equation, you're going to use this all the time. No, I'm not. Never did in my life, but thank you for telling me something I'm never going to use. But I'm just saying there's certain things that you learn that we don't need potentially. But the strategy, I think, is very important, because that's something we're not taught unless you've been in the military. And myself, I was in the medical side. There's not much strategy over there. I think it's more of the infantry and more of that. And I would say it more Army, or if you're up into the level of in the ship world in the Navy.
Yeah, it's true. In every career, you spend the beginning of your career getting rewarded for technical and tactical skills. You're getting things done day by day, week by week. As you move along in your career and in any profession, and you're put in charge of something or some people, all of a sudden the mix of skills you need to use are strategic and interpersonal, not just technical and tactical. You have to know where the organization's going and why, and you have to get people motivated to work together to want to take it there. So it's a totally different skill set. When I surveyed the literature of how much corporate training is oriented on technical and tactical skills, more certifications, more skills versus strategic interpersonal skills, it's like 80-20.
Yeah, I can see that.
So we all know we need to be able to think strategically and lead people. And yet at the same time, only a tiny percentage of the training world actually goes to train those things.
John, what I did in today's episode, what didn't I ask you that I should ask you?
Oh gosh, you ask great questions. One of the things I just encourage, on veterans is, if you think about this schematic I just laid out, tactical and tactile versus strategic and interpersonal. And I see a lot of veterans try to squeeze their military resume into something that looks like it would have civilian appeal, and they try to coax it that way. And I say, you know what? Don't put too much weight on the actual technical and tactical skills you learn in the military. What makes you valuable to organizations is your strategic and interpersonal skills that you learned. You know how to form and build teams. You know how to pull organizations forward. You know how to motivate people, right? That's the thing that I hear CEOs all the time saying, I just need people who can do that. I don't need more programmers. I don't need more any of that. I need people who know how to get things done and get people to work together to do them. So I think that's something vets bring to any organization, schools, businesses, whatever.
Yeah, I think just like you said, but we don't talk about that as much. That's what we do, because that's what we do. That's exactly what, as you move up the rank and now you have more leadership skills and more of this, more of that, and that's what you have to do. But I think a lot of people in the civilian world have no idea how to relate certain things we did, even if it's the same job. I interviewed a engineer who got out and he couldn't find a job as an engineer because they didn't understand. It was the same thing, but they didn't understand the military lingo versus the civilian lingo difference.
Right. Yeah, I tell people not to worry about that, too much. Don't try to do the translation. Just be who you are. And believe me, these organizations want you. They want you for who you are, not necessarily what you can do. So focus on your character. What this writer David Brooks calls your eulogy values, not your resume values.
Well, there you go. John, thanks for coming on the show today. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, it's great to be with you, Ed. Thanks.
How do people find you?
My website's johnhillen.com, JOHNHILLEN.com. And the book, The Strategy Dialogues, is on Amazon and everywhere else you can find it, Audible, all the different varieties.
And are your other books on there too?
They are. Yeah. Easily found.
All right. John, again, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.